In the last video, we played with the Panasonic LUMIX S5II for the very first time, and I surprisingly ended up really liking this camera more than I thought I would. So for the past month, we've put this camera to the test to learn a little bit more about it and compared it to one of our main cameras, the Canon EOS R6II. Hi everyone, if you're new to my channel, my name is Paula, and in this video, we're going to be talking about all the unique features that the LUMIX S5II has that sets it apart from other cameras out in the market, its strengths and weaknesses, and of course, comparing it to the R6II and telling you guys about its major similarities and some pretty big differences as well. So if you're debating between a mid-priced full-frame camera or considering splurging on the higher end price tag, stick around and see if the LUMIX S5II is right for you. So just to get some specs out of the way, we have here the R6II as well as the S5II, and we're going to be comparing these in their physical features as well as what makes them similar and some major differences. So between these two cameras, the S5II weighs in at about 740 grams, while the R6II weighs around 670 grams. That's surprising to me because if you can see here, these two cameras are very similar in size, but you can also kind of tell that the LUMIX body is slightly smaller. Is it noticeable? Not really, because the weight is really subjective to the lens that you choose. The lens that I have here is the kit lens on the LUMIX, and it is a little bit of a shorter lens anyway. And what I have on the R6 right now is the 14-35 f4 lens, which is also a shorter lens. However, it is still a little bit longer. So I don't think there's a clear winner with these two as far as weight. The S5II uses DMW BM-B9 lithium ion battery, and you charge this camera by plugging in your USB-C charger, and you basically can charge this plugged into a wall, but you charge the whole camera. I thought that too was interesting with the LUMIX, at least from when I got this in the box. If you guys had seen my last video, we were able to snag an open box model, and this was actually the floor model at our local Best Buy. I was surprised that it didn't come with an extra battery charger. There is, of course, a way to charge this battery with its own charger, but it is a separate purchase. So something to keep in mind. And since we're comparing batteries anyway, so the R6, this is the battery it comes with. I forget what this one is called, but very similar size and weight to the LUMIX's battery, and it does come with the wall charger already included with purchase, so I didn't have to worry about doing that. And I believe that the R6 also is rechargeable via USB-C, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, it does have a USB-C port as well. So both these cameras can be charged via USB-C. So again, no clear winner other than the fact that I would have to give this one to Canon because they do have that extra wall charger included. With a full charge, these cameras both claim to have about 5 hours of shooting time, and I did find that to be accurate while I was working with these, shooting mostly video. I think we shot the most with this about maybe 5 to 8 hours depending on the project that we were working on, and that was all with just one battery pack, and neither camera lost battery too quickly, so I think that is a pretty solid claim for both cameras. As you can see with the dimensions, they are also fairly similar. Like I mentioned earlier, you can tell that the LUMIX is slightly smaller, but as far as grip size, this is where it's a little bit different. The LUMIX slightly has a bit more texture on the grip. Since it is a bit of a smaller body, it is a little bit more narrow to hold, and I think it might even be just slightly shorter than the R6. Whereas the R6, it has a somewhat bit of a smoother texture. It's still pretty comfortable to hold. What I do like with the R6, it is a little bit wider than the LUMIX. That's probably being a little too specific. I usually just shoot videos for YouTube mostly, so I'm not someone who is stuck behind the camera for many hours where I really need to rely on a super comfortable grip. But for someone who might be doing professional work, that might make a difference. The S5II can shoot all eye, while the R6 Mark II can only shoot IPB. The easiest explanation that I found was that all eye is a compression method that was designed for higher end cameras to capture the highest quality possible. What this means for filmmakers, videographers, and editors alike is individual frames are much higher quality than IPB compression. Overall files are much larger, about 3 times larger than IPB compression, and continuous shooting is limited compared to IPB compression. In layman terms, both all eye and IPB compresses the file sizes to be much smaller, but they say that all eye is a little bit of a higher quality compared to IPB. I personally shoot with IPB on my Canon because I also need to have smaller file sizes because I only edit on my MacBook and I work with lots of clips, so I need to make sure that I'm optimizing my storage as much as possible while working on a project. So IPB has always been ideal for me, and it's just nice to know that with the S5II you have the option to go a step above IPB, which is all eye. In the last video, I briefly mentioned how much I liked the button layout on this camera, making it really easy to use out the gate. What I also really like is its labeled physical buttons on the camera for white balance, ISO, and exposure, leaving the turning dials for aperture and shooting angle. This makes it so much easier for me to toggle between the ISO, shutter speed, and the aperture, which are the controls that you really have to focus on when taking photos as well as shooting video. Of course, like many other full frames, you can customize your own buttons on the S5II as well, but I thought it was nice that right out of the box, the default settings were just easy to find, and they called out the buttons that I would reach for the most. One of the surprising things that I really loved about this camera. Panasonic is known to be the best in IBIS compared to its competitors. For my setup, only the body has IBIS and the lens does not, since this is only a kit lens. So in reviewing these clips, this is what it looks like on the Lumix versus the Canon. Like I mentioned, we've been working with this camera for a few weeks. As far as IBIS, the IBIS on the S5II on static shots here is pretty decent. You can't really pick up any micro jitters, although like I said, everything was handheld. In fact, here I was actually squatting down. The next shot here, we have IBIS really working in our favor. Of course, I was just walking behind Brian, and as you can see, there really wasn't that much shake. So I think IBIS did a pretty good job. By the way, the settings on the IBIS that I was using, I had E stabilization turned off, I believe, and then boost was turned on. Shot of the trees, and I think I did a little panning just to show. I also did a handheld test with this, so let's take a look. This is a stability test on the Lumix S5II, and this is handheld at 20mm f20 since it's really bright out right now. We have boost turned on as well as E stabilization turned off. More static shots of some geese that we found at the parks. There was this really nice pond here in the middle, so that was pretty cool. I think it did a pretty good job with IBIS, considering that only the body has stabilization and not the lens. Here we have Canon. We're at a different park this time, and Brian's holding the camera. Same thing, it doesn't have as much micro jitters. Of course, he's not super static. Let me see if I can find a static shot. Okay, so this is what walking behind Brian's gonna look like on the Canon. So a little bit more wobbly in my opinion, but ironically the Canon actually has IBIS on both the lens and the body. So just to compare these two, this is what the Canon's walking shot looks like, and this was on the Lumix. Still not too bad. Both scenes had pretty flat ground to walk on, but I can say that the IBIS on the Lumix is slightly better than the double IBIS on the Canon and the R6. And I also did a handheld shot just to compare apples to apples with the R6. Let's take a look. Handheld test on the R6 Mark II now. We are shooting at 15mm f22 since it's again really bright and I don't have any filters. Let me know if there's any wobble in the footage or if everything looks and sounds okay. This is still at arm's length and it is a longer barrel on the lens, so the distance to my face is probably going to be a little different than the Lumix. As far as these two cameras, both have a wobble at the widest angle, Canon being a little bit more obvious than the Lumix, especially considering that the R6 body as well as its lens both have stabilization and the S5II only has the body. I would say I would give the points to Lumix for the IBIS on this one. Some other things to note: dual native ISO. Now, the S5II does officially have dual native ISO with a base level of 640, jumping to 4000 ISO at the upper threshold. Meanwhile, Canon doesn't officially have dual native ISO. However, it does have grain cleanup starting at 3200 ISO. We shot at night with both the S5II as well as the R6 Mark II, ISO 4000 for the Lumix and 3200 for the Canon. Without adjusting either of these footages, you can see that the Canon does have slightly less grain. I count that as dual native for the Canon, so this is what they look like for both of those levels. We also shot outdoors on this trip at night, and you could see that Canon wins this spot due to the cleaner image, even with its unofficial dual native ISO. But the S5II footage is nothing to sleep on, as it's still not that far behind. With the access of dual native ISO on the S5II, it is still something that you can definitely work with in darker settings. I guess at that point, it would just be a matter of how often do you shoot at night, and if that is something that you really need to have an improved dual native ISO ability on, or if this image looks good enough for you, then the S5II is definitely still a strong contender. Of course, the biggest difference between the two cameras is the price point. The Lumix S5II body only sets you back around $2,000. Meanwhile, the Canon EOS R6 Mark II is normally going for about $2,500. Where the S5II shines in my experience is the ease of using it. The menu system isn't as complicated as other camera brands. And again, the called out labels on the outside of the camera has definitely been helpful for someone who doesn't have time to do a lot of custom settings. I would say if you're someone who is looking for a first full frame camera to invest in, or perhaps just wanting to get into the Panasonic line, they have lots of really great cameras, and I think this one is a good place to start as far as their full frames. Based on everything that you've heard today, I would love to know which camera you guys would prefer. Let me know in the comments down below. If you guys liked this video or found the information helpful, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up down below, as well as subscribe for more tech and gear related videos. Thank you all again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.